The opulent ballroom of Lady Fenwick's gala shimmered, a golden cage for London's elite. Elara Vance, 40 and unmarried, observed the whirling couples from a discreet corner. "Still here?" whispered Lady Ashworth. "One would think after 2 decades." The cruel words found their mark, yet Elara straightened her spine. "Elara," a kind voice interrupted her thoughts. Her brother, Arthur, Earl of Stonehaven, stood beside her, his brow furrowed with familiar concern. "You look rather weary. May I fetch you some refreshment?" "Thank you, Arthur, but I am quite well," she replied, a practiced smile gracing her lips. "I was merely observing the new debutantes. Lady Fenwick has outdone herself this season." Arthur's expression softened further. "Elara, you need not attend every social function. No one would think less of you if I were to retire from society altogether," she finished for him, a rare flash of defiance in her eyes. "Become the reclusive aunt? No, brother. I may not have secured a husband, but I refuse to vanish entirely." Before Arthur could respond, a hush fell over the ballroom. Even the orchestra seemed to falter. "Lord Thorne," announced the butler at the grand entrance. Richard Valerius Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, stood framed in the doorway, tall and imposing in his immaculate evening attire. His dark hair swept back from a face that poets had compared to classical marble. At 38, he remained the most eligible bachelor in England, his title ancient, his fortune vast. "He looks particularly unapproachable this evening," Arthur murmured. "I wonder what poor debutante will be thrust in his path tonight." Elara watched as the assembled company parted like the Red Sea. Despite his legendary wealth and status, Lord Thorne was known for his aloofness, his precise manners, and his apparent immunity to the charms of even the most beautiful young ladies of the ton. "He has refused 3 perfect matches this season alone," Arthur continued. "Lady Fenwick must be beside herself. Her daughter is among this year's offerings." "Perhaps he finds the parade of innocence tiresome," Elara replied, surprising herself with the frankness of her observation. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Speaking from experience, sister?" "Speaking as one who has observed 20 seasons from the sidelines," she corrected gently. "There is a certain predictability to it all." Her tone held a subtle, perceptive cynicism. As the evening progressed, Elara maintained her position of dignified observation. She exchanged pleasantries with acquaintances, danced a single quadrille with her brother-in-law, Lord Harrington, and otherwise remained unobtrusive. It was a skill she had perfected over the years, fading into the rich tapestries and shadows, a silent witness to the glittering, superficial dance of society. Her presence was expected, her participation minimal, her existence largely unnoticed. It was during the supper dance that fate intervened. Making her way to the refreshment room for a momentary respite from the crush, Elara rounded a corner from the opposite direction and collided with a solid form. "My apologies," she began, flustered, then froze as she found herself looking directly into the piercing gray eyes of Lord Thorne. "The fault is entirely mine, madam," he replied, his voice deep and melodious. For a moment, brief but unmistakable, his gaze lingered on her face with an intensity that caused her heart to skip a beat. "Miss Vance," she supplied, offering a curtsy appropriate to his rank. "Miss Vance," he repeated, as though committing the name to memory. Then, with a formal bow, he continued on his way. It was a fleeting encounter, the sort that would normally be forgotten before the evening's end. Yet, as Elara rejoined the gathering, she could not shake the peculiar sensation that the Duke's eyes followed her movements across the room. Foolishness, she chided herself. A man like Lord Thorne would not seriously notice a woman like her. It was surely nothing more than a momentary caprice, a flicker of passing interest. But a seed of curiosity, dangerous and unbidden, had been planted. Later, as the orchestra struck up a waltz, Elara prepared to retreat further into the shadows. It was then that a familiar deep voice spoke at her shoulder. "Miss Vance, might I have the honor of this dance?" The ballroom seemed to still around them as Lord Thorne extended his hand toward the most unexpected recipient imaginable. Elara felt the weight of 100 stunned gazes upon her. "Your Grace," she began, her voice barely audible above the music. "I fear you have mistaken me for someone else." "I am not in the habit of making mistakes, Miss Vance," he replied, the faintest suggestion of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The waltz awaits. Will you do me the honor?" 20 years of social conditioning urged her to decline, yet something in his unwavering gaze compelled her to place her gloved hand in his. "The honor is mine, Your Grace." As he led her onto the floor, the whispers erupted like a swarm of agitated bees. The Duke of Blackwood, who had declined to dance with the season's most celebrated beauties, was leading Miss Elara Vance, 40 and unmarried, into a waltz. Lady Ashworth's gaze, sharp and critical, pierced through the crowd. "You realize, of course, that you have just scandalized the entire assembly," Elara murmured as they took their positions. "Have I?" he replied, seeming genuinely unconcerned as his hand settled at her waist. "I was under the impression I was merely dancing with the most interesting woman in the room." The music began, sweeping them into the dance. "You dance beautifully, Miss Vance," Richard observed. "Practice, Your Grace," she replied, "though I confess it has been some time since I was last invited to waltz." "Then the gentlemen of the ton have demonstrated a remarkable lack of judgment." Elara could not help but laugh, a soft, genuine sound that drew even more stares from those around them. It was a sound rarely heard from her in such company. "You are either exceedingly kind or deliberately provocative, Your Grace. I have yet to determine which." "Perhaps both," he conceded, guiding her through a turn with effortless skill. "Tell me, Miss Vance, do you enjoy these affairs?" "They serve their purpose," she answered diplomatically. "That is not what I asked." The directness of his gaze unsettled her. It had been years since anyone had looked at her with such focused attention, as though her thoughts and feelings were worthy of genuine consideration. "No," she admitted finally. "I find them rather tedious, but one must maintain appearances." "Indeed," he murmured, and for a moment she glimpsed something in his expression, a fleeting shadow of understanding that suggested he too wore a mask for society's benefit, a shared weariness beneath the polished facade. As the final notes of the waltz faded, the Duke escorted her back to the edge of the ballroom. Before taking his leave, he bent slightly to speak near her ear. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Vance. It was without question the highlight of an otherwise unbearable evening." Then he was gone, moving through the crowd with that peculiar combination of authority and detachment that seemed uniquely his, leaving Elara to face the approaching tide of curious acquaintances, all desperate to discover what the Duke of Blackwood could possibly have said to the spinster of Vance House. In the carriage returning home that night, Arthur regarded his sister with poorly concealed curiosity. "Well," he prompted finally, "will you not tell me what transpired between you and Blackwood?" Elara gazed out at the lamplit streets of London. "We danced, Arthur. Nothing more." "The most eligible man in England does not simply dance with anyone, Elara, particularly not when he has refused the hand of every debutante this season." She turned to face her brother, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps he was merely being kind. Arthur snorted. "Blackwood is many things. Wealthy, powerful, respected, but kind has never been among his known qualities. The man has a heart of stone, if the rumors are to be believed." Back at Vance House, as her lady's maid Bennet helped her prepare for bed, Elara caught sight of herself in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was neither young nor beautiful by society's standards. The bloom of youth had faded, leaving fine lines and a certain gravity. A fleeting, painful memory surfaced, a sun-dappled garden 20 years ago. Mr. Caldwell, a promising suitor, had politely but firmly ended their courtship. "You are too bookish, Miss Vance," he'd said, his smile insincere, "and you lack the vivacity one expects in a wife. I prefer a simpler mind." The words had carved a lasting scar, making her believe her intellect was a flaw, her quiet nature a deficiency. Yet, for the first time in years, she looked at her reflection and wondered if perhaps there was something still worthy of notice in the woman she had become. Foolishness, she chided herself aloud, dismissing the thought. A man like the Duke of Blackwood did not seriously consider women like Elara Vance. Whatever his reasons, it would surely be nothing more than a momentary caprice. Little did she know that across London, in the opulent study of Blackwood Manor, Lord Thorne sat with a glass of brandy, contemplating the unexpected discovery he had made at the Fenwick Gala, Elara Vance. Her intelligent eyes, her quiet dignity, the surprisingly frank wit that had sparked beneath her composed exterior. In the space of a single dance, she had intrigued him more than all the bright young things of the season combined. His cynical shield, forged over years of superficial encounters, had found an unexpected crack. This was not caprice. This was something far more profound, a deliberate stirring of curiosity he had long thought dormant. His intentions, he realized, were only just beginning to form, but they were serious indeed. The morning following the Fenwick Gala dawned gray and drizzly, a fitting backdrop to Elara's reflections. She sat at her writing desk composing a letter to her married sister, attempting to dismiss the previous night's encounter with the Duke. She had almost convinced herself it had been nothing more than a curious aberration, a fleeting moment of uncharacteristic attention. Her self-reassurance was abruptly interrupted when Mr. Davies, the butler, appeared at her door. "A delivery for you, Miss Vance," he announced, with the faintest hint of surprise in his normally impassive voice. The footman behind him carried a magnificent arrangement of deep crimson roses, so abundant they nearly obscured his face. As he placed the crystal vase on a side table, Elara stared in bewilderment. "There must be some mistake," she began. "No, miss," the butler replied, extending a small cream-colored card on a silver salver. "The messenger was most specific." With fingers that trembled slightly, Elara took the card. Upon it, in a bold, masculine hand, was written, "To brighten a dreary London morning, Blackwood." "Heavens above," she whispered, the card nearly slipping from her fingers. "Will there be a response, Miss Vance?" Mr. Davies inquired discreetly. I know not at present," she managed, still staring at the roses as though they might vanish. When the servants had withdrawn, Elara approached the flowers, inhaling their rich fragrance. In all her 40 years, no gentleman had ever sent her flowers, not even during her debut season, when she had been young and moderately pretty. "What game is he playing?" she murmured, gently touching one velvet petal, her suspicion battling with a dangerous, unfamiliar thrill. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of her sister-in-law, Lady Lillian, known to all as Charlotte, Countess of Stonehaven, who burst into the room in a flutter of morning silk. "Is it true?" Charlotte demanded without preamble. "Did the Duke of Blackwood truly send you roses?" "News travels with remarkable speed in this household," Elara sighed. "The servants talk, especially when something so unprecedented occurs," Charlotte replied, circling the arrangement with wide eyes. "Elara, these must have cost a small fortune at this time of year." "I'm sure it's merely a courtesy after our dance," Elara said, attempting to sound dismissive. Charlotte gave her a shrewd look. "The Duke of Blackwood does not dance with spinsters, nor does he send them roses as a courtesy. Something very strange is happening." Before Elara could formulate a response, Mr. Davies appeared again. "Lord Stonehaven requests Miss Vance's presence in the study." Downstairs, Arthur paced before the fireplace, his expression troubled. He stopped when Elara entered. "I've just come from my club," he began without preamble. "The entire town is talking about nothing but you and Blackwood." Elara sank into a chair. Surely there are more important matters worthy of discussion. "Not in London during the season," Arthur replied grimly. "Particularly not when the most sought-after bachelor in England singled out." He stopped abruptly. "A spinster," Elara finished for him, her voice calm despite the sting. "You need not mince words, Arthur. I am well aware of my status." Her brother had the grace to look contrite. "Forgive me. I only meant that it is unusual, and people are curious. Blackwood has rejected countless eligible young ladies. Why should he suddenly show interest in someone so manifestly unsuitable?" "I assure you, I have asked myself the same question," Elara admitted softly. She knew Arthur spoke from a place of deep concern, remembering her own quiet heartbreak from a past rejection that had left her feeling perpetually unsuitable. Arthur crossed to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand. "Elara, I worry for you. If Blackwood is playing some sort of cruel game, then—" "Then I shall be no worse off than I am now," she replied softly, pulling her hand away gently. Her brother studied her face. "You find him intriguing, don't you?" "I found our brief conversation refreshingly direct. Nothing more," Elara said. "And now he has sent roses, which is certainly flattering, but hardly indicative of serious intent." "Be careful," Arthur warned, rising. "Blackwood may be the most eligible man in England, but he is not known for his warmth. Some say he ended his last engagement to Lady Clarissa Ashworth because she once laughed too loudly at dinner. Lady Ashworth, Clarissa's mother, has never forgiven him." Elara raised an eyebrow. "Gossip, Arthur. I thought better of you." "Not gossip, concern," he corrected. "You have built a life of dignity despite society's cruelties. I would not see you hurt by a man incapable of appreciating your worth." The conversation lingered in Elara's mind as she prepared for the Vance family's annual visit to the Royal Academy exhibition that afternoon. It was a tradition, one of the few social occasions where her status attracted little notice. She selected a walking dress of deep forest green, a color she favored for its subdued elegance. As Bennett arranged her hair, Elara found herself paying uncharacteristic attention to her appearance, pinching color into her cheeks and selecting her finest lace collar. "Foolishness," she murmured again, though with less conviction than before. At the Royal Academy, the Vance party moved slowly through the crowded galleries. Elara had just separated from her family to examine a particularly fine seascape when a familiar voice spoke beside her. "Turner at his finest, would you not agree, Miss Vance?" She turned to find Lord Thorne standing at her elbow, resplendent in a perfectly tailored morning coat that emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding height. "Your Grace," she acknowledged with a small curtsy. Yes, his understanding of light is unparalleled. "You have an appreciation for art?" he inquired, his gray eyes studying her with that same unsettling intensity she remembered from the ball. "I do," she replied simply, "though I claim no expertise, merely an enthusiast's pleasure." "That is refreshing," he said, offering his arm. "Shall we continue to the next gallery? I find most commentary on art to be tediously affected, but I suspect yours might prove an exception." Aware of the curious glances directed their way, Elara hesitated before placing her gloved hand lightly on his arm. "You risk further scandal, Your Grace. 2 encounters in as many days will set tongues wagging even more vigorously." "Let them wag," he replied dismissively. "I have endured society speculation for years. It holds no terror for me." As they moved through the exhibition, Elara found herself relaxing into their conversation. The Duke, it seemed, possessed a genuine knowledge of art, formed through travel and study rather than mere fashion. More surprising still was his willingness to listen to her observations, responding with thoughtful comments that built upon her ideas rather than dismissing them. "You have traveled to Florence, then?" he asked, as they paused before an Italian landscape. "No," she admitted. "My knowledge comes entirely from books and exhibitions. I have never left England." Something like surprise flickered across his features. "Never? With your evident appreciation for art and culture, I would have thought." "My circumstances have not permitted extensive travel," she explained simply, without self-pity. The Duke's expression shifted subtly, a grave oversight. The Uffizi Gallery alone would provide you with a lifetime of contemplation. His gaze held a new, quiet understanding. At the Royal Academy, Elara and Lord Thorne were engrossed in their discussion of the Italian landscape when a sharp, familiar voice cut through the murmurs of the gallery. "Your Grace," Lady Ashworth exclaimed, her smile a tight, brittle thing as she approached, her daughter, Clarissa, a vision in pale yellow, trailing demurely behind her. "What an unexpected pleasure to find you so deeply engaged in academic interests. Penelope and I were just admiring the Reynolds portrait." Clarissa, Thorne's former fiancée, offered a simpering curtsy, her gaze flitting from Thorne to Elara with an air of practiced indifference. "Oh, indeed, Mamma. Though I confess, these historical subjects can be so dreary. I much prefer more romantic themes." The Duke's expression remained impassive, a mask of aristocratic coolness. "Lady Ashworth, Miss Ashworth, I trust you are enjoying the exhibition." His voice, usually deep and melodious, held a noticeable chill. "Miss Vance and I, We're just discussing Turner's revolutionary approach to light and atmosphere. She has made several observations that I found quite illuminating." All eyes, including Clarissa's, turned to Elara, who felt a flush rise to her cheeks at this unexpected praise. Lady Ashworth's smile tightened further, her eyes narrowing. "How interesting," she replied, her tone dripping with thinly veiled disdain. "I had no idea Miss Vance harbored such intellectual pursuits. One rarely hears of such depth from ladies who prefer the quieter corners of society." "Few people take the time to discover what lies beneath the surface, Lady Ashworth," Thorne replied, his tone carrying an edge that was not lost on either woman. His gaze, though directed at Lady Ashworth, held a subtle, powerful defense of Elara's intelligence. An awkward silence followed, broken only when Arthur, Elara's brother, appeared at her side, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. He nodded formally to the assembled group. "Elara, Mother is requesting your company. The crowds are becoming rather tiresome." With a graceful curtsy to the Duke and a polite nod to the Ashworths, Elara allowed herself to be led away. As they moved through the throng, Arthur murmured under his breath, "That is twice in 2 days. And now the roses!" "People are beginning to talk, Elara, even more vigorously than before." Elara sighed, her weariness evident. "People always talk, Arthur. It is the very air they breathe in London." "Not about you," he countered, his voice low but firm. "Not like this. Never like this. You've always been invisible enough to escape the worst of it. Now you're the very subject of it all." Elara could feel the weight of Thorne's gaze following her retreat, even as his presence had made Lady Ashworth's barbs less potent. Yet Arthur's words, born of worry, still found their mark. A reminder of the relentless scrutiny she now faced. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of strained conversation and curious glances. By the time the Vance party returned home, Elara felt emotionally exhausted from the constant scrutiny. Retreating to her private sitting room, she found another delivery awaiting her. Upon a small side table rested a beautifully bound volume of Turner's collected works, its cover gleaming with embossed gold. It was accompanied by a small, cream-colored card, propped against the spine. With fingers that trembled slightly, Elara took the card. Upon it, in the Duke's now familiar, bold, masculine hand, was written, "For a fellow admirer of genius. Perhaps you might permit me to call tomorrow at 2, Blackwood." Elara sank into a nearby armchair, the book clutched to her chest, her mind awhirl with confusion and a dangerous spark of hope that she had thought extinguished long ago. He wishes to call? Privately? What game is he playing now? The audacity of it, after the public spectacles of the ball and the exhibition, was breathtaking. Across town, in the elegant confines of his study, Richard Valerius Thorne, Duke of Blackwood, sat opposite his oldest friend, Lord James Hartwell, who regarded him with frank astonishment. A snifter of brandy rested, untouched, on the polished mahogany desk between them. "You cannot be serious, Richard," Hartwell exclaimed, running a hand through his slightly disheveled dark hair. "Miss Vance, the woman must be nearly 40. "She is precisely 40, the Duke corrected calmly, taking a slow sip of his own brandy, "and possessed of more intelligence and genuine grace than any debutante I have encountered in the past decade." Hartwell shook his head in disbelief. "The ton will think you've lost your mind. There are a dozen suitable young ladies from the finest families who would simper and agree with every word I uttered, regardless of whether they understood it." Richard interrupted, his voice edged with a familiar weariness. "Who would marry me for my title, my fortune, and the prestige of being a duchess, without the slightest interest in who I am beneath those trappings?" He gazed into the flickering fire, his features unreadable in the shifting light. "Miss Vance is different, entirely different. She speaks her mind. She observes the world with clear eyes, and she expects nothing from me, which I find makes me want to offer her everything." Hartwell studied his friend with growing concern. "Richard, if this is some rebellion against society's expectations, or a belated reaction to—" "Clarissa." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of the name. "It is not," he replied, his voice firm, though a shadow of past hurt flickered in his eyes. "My broken engagement with Lady Clarissa Ashworth, as you well know, left me wary of women who saw only the title, never the man. She openly admitted her calculating ambitions, as you so aptly termed them at the time, and her preference for a life of ease over genuine connection." Hartwell nodded slowly, a dawning understanding in his eyes. He remembered the raw, cold anger that had consumed Richard after that betrayal, the withdrawal from society, the deepening cynicism. And Miss Vance's quiet dignity, her evident lack of such ambition, is refreshing. "More than refreshing, James," Richard stated, his gaze returning to the fire. "It is profoundly liberating. For the first time in my life, I have met a woman whose company I genuinely enjoy, who challenges my thoughts rather than merely reflecting them back to me, who sees me." Richard gazed into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps it is time for a different path, a path less dictated by the whims and expectations of a society that has consistently valued superficiality over substance. You realize what you're contemplating?" Hartwell pressed, leaning forward. "The scandal would be unprecedented. A duke, particularly one of your standing, does not simply take an interest in a spinster of 40 with no fortune and no connections beyond a minor earldom." "I said nothing of marriage," Richard replied, though the slight tension in his jaw belied his casual tone. Hartwell laughed without humor. "My friend, you have publicly singled out a respectable, unmarried woman of good family. You've sent her flowers and books. You've requested permission to call. Either you are contemplating marriage, or you are behaving in a manner most would consider dishonorable." The Duke's expression hardened. "You know me better than that." "I do," Hartwell conceded, rising from his chair to pace before the hearth. "Which is why your sudden interest in Miss Vance is so baffling. You have refused the hand of every suitable young lady presented to you for years, citing various trivial flaws. Now you appear captivated by a woman who, by society's reckoning, is thoroughly on the shelf. Society, Richard, can go hang. But Miss Vance has undoubtedly endured years of subtle cruelty from the ton. If you pursue her only to withdraw, the consequences for her would be devastating. Her reputation, already precarious, would be utterly ruined." For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in the Duke's gray eyes, an expression so rare that Hartwell nearly missed it. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool determination that was the Duke's hallmark. "I have no intention of withdrawing," Richard stated with quiet finality. "Miss Vance has waited 40 years to be properly seen. I intend to ensure she never feels invisible again. I give you my solemn word, James, I will not cause her pain." The following afternoon found Elara seated in the Vance house drawing-room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to disguise their trembling. The mantel clock ticked relentlessly toward 2 o'clock. Each second bringing her closer to the Duke's promised call. She had spent the morning in a state of uncharacteristic indecision, changing her gown 3 times before settling on a deep burgundy day dress that complemented her auburn hair, now showing threads of silver at the temples, and brought a touch of color to her pale complexion. "This is madness," she whispered to herself as the clock chimed the hour. "A man like the Duke of Blackwood does not seriously court a woman like me. Not after Mr. Caldwell dismissed me as too plain in my youth, nor after that other suitor found me, past my prime in my late 20s. I should have learned my lesson then." Yet, even as the words left her lips, a dangerous spark of hope flickered within her. Precisely on the hour, Mr. Davies, the butler, appeared at the drawing-room door. "His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood," he announced, his tone suggesting that he too found the situation extraordinary. Richard Valerius Thorne entered the room with the quiet assurance of a man accustomed to commanding attention wherever he went. Dressed impeccably in a charcoal frock coat and dove-gray waistcoat, he seemed to bring a different atmosphere with him, something electric and vital that made the familiar drawing room suddenly seem more vibrant. "Miss Vance," he greeted her, bowing over her hand with perfect courtesy. His touch was light, yet sent a jolt through her. "You are most kind to receive me." "Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest, gesturing to a chair opposite her own. "I confess, your request took me by surprise." "A pleasant one, I hope?" he inquired, taking the offered seat with a grace that belied his imposing presence. Elara hesitated. "A puzzling one," she admitted finally, meeting his direct gaze. "You must be aware that your attention has caused quite a stir." A smile, brief but genuine, transformed his austere features. "Good. The ton has grown far too comfortable in its rigid expectations. A little disruption is long overdue." "Is that what I am?" she asked quietly, a hint of vulnerability in her tone. "A disruption to the established order? A mere means to an end?" The Duke studied her face with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beneath surfaces. "You are many things, Miss Vance, but a mere instrument of social rebellion is not one of them. You are far too singular for such a mundane role." The butler returned with tea, providing Elara with a momentary reprieve from the intensity of the Duke's attention. As she poured for them both, her movements precise and practiced, she was acutely aware of the domestic intimacy of the scene, something she had observed countless times between her married sisters and their husbands, but had never experienced herself. It was a tableau that felt both alien and strangely compelling. "You enjoyed the book?" the Duke inquired, accepting his cup with a nod of thanks, deftly shifting the conversation to safer ground. "Very much," she replied, relaxing slightly. "The color plates are magnificent. Thank you for such a thoughtful gift. It was entirely unnecessary, yet deeply appreciated." "It seemed fitting," he said, his gaze lingering on her. "Your observations yesterday revealed a genuine appreciation that deserves cultivation." Elara sipped her tea, the warmth a comforting contrast to the tumult of her emotions. But she knew she could not postpone the inevitable. The question had haunted her since the Peaton ball, growing louder with each rose, each book, each public encounter. She set down her cup, her hands steady. "Your Grace," she began, her voice calm despite the tremor in her heart. "Forgive my directness, but I must ask, why have you singled me out for these attentions?" Richard set down his own cup, his expression serious, his gray eyes fixed on hers. He leaned forward slightly, preparing to answer, and Elara braced herself for whatever truth or polite fiction he might offer. "Because in a sea of artifice you stand as a beacon of authenticity," Richard began, his voice deep and resonant. "Because when you speak, you say what you mean, rather than what you believe I wish to hear. Because your eyes reflect a depth of thought and feeling that I find compelling. And because, Miss Vance, you are the most profoundly interesting woman I have met in years." The simple honesty of his answer stole Elara's breath. No man had ever spoken to her with such straightforward admiration, not even in her youth, when she had still harbored hopes of marriage. It was a revelation, shattering decades of quiet resignation. She found herself utterly speechless, a warmth spreading through her chest that was both startling and intoxicating. "I am 40 years old, Your Grace," Elara reminded him, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions his words had stirred. She felt compelled to articulate the undeniable truths of her situation, the truths society had hammered into her for decades. "I have no fortune, no particular beauty by conventional standards, and no accomplishments beyond those expected of any gentlewoman. Indeed, in my late 20s, a suitor gently but firmly suggested I was, past my prime, for marriage, and another implied I was, too reserved, for a proper household." She met his gaze, a lifetime of quiet rejection hardening her resolve. "Surely there are dozens of young ladies more worthy of your interest." "Worthy," Richard repeated, an edge entering his voice. A curious choice of words. "Tell me, Miss Vance, by what measure do you determine a person's worth? By youth, beauty, fortune? These seem remarkably shallow criteria for a woman of your intelligence." Elara flushed. "You misunderstand me. I meant only that society—" "Society," he interrupted, his tone chilling, "has consistently demonstrated a profound inability to recognize true value. I, however, am not so limited in my perceptions. I find it ironic that the very qualities society dismisses in you are precisely those I find most admirable." He held her gaze, unwavering, and Elara felt a strange sense of empowerment beneath his scrutiny. A charged silence fell between them, broken only when the Duke rose and crossed to the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Perhaps I should speak plainly," he said, turning back to face her. "I have spent the past 15 years avoiding matrimony, Miss Vance, because I have never encountered a woman whose company I could envision tolerating for a lifetime. Not one whose mind engaged mine, whose spirit resonated with my own, until now." Elara stared at him, certain she had misheard. His words hung in the air, heavy with a significance that defied all her expectations, all her years of quiet resignation. She felt a tremor of disbelief, a wild, impossible hope beginning to bloom in her chest. Richard returned to his seat, leaning forward slightly, his gray eyes unwavering. "I am well aware that my attention has placed you in an uncomfortable position," society whispers. "Your family worries, and you yourself must be uncertain of my intentions." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Allow me to clarify them. I wish to court you, Miss Vance, with the utmost propriety and respect. If, after a period of better acquaintance, you find my company as agreeable as I find yours, I hope you might consider a more permanent arrangement." Elara felt as though the floor had fallen away beneath her feet. A permanent arrangement? He means marriage. Her breath caught in her throat. He had systematically dismantled every objection, every societal barrier she had erected around her heart. His quiet, unyielding determination was breathtaking. "You cannot be serious," Elara whispered, the words barely audible. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," he replied simply, his expression grave. "The scandal means nothing to me. The disparity in our situations is relevant only if we allow it to be. Your family's expectations are not my concern. I am the head of my house, and I answer to no one regarding my choice of bride." His calm dismantling of each objection left Elara speechless. Finally, she managed to ask the question that lay at the heart of her disbelief. "Why me, Your Grace? After all these years of refusing every eligible match, why would you choose someone society considers thoroughly unmarriageable?" Richard's expression softened. "Because when we danced, Miss Vance, I felt for the first time that I was in the presence of a woman who saw me. Not the Duke, not the fortune, not the ancient title, but the man beneath all those trappings. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Elara felt a tear prick the corner of her eye. Finally, truly seen. Before she could respond, the drawing-room door opened to admit Lady Vance, Elara's mother, whose surprise at finding the Duke of Blackwood in her drawing-room was poorly concealed beneath a veneer of social grace. "Your Grace," she exclaimed, curtsying deeply, "what an unexpected honor! I do apologize for interrupting." "Not at all, Lady Vance," Richard replied, rising to bow. "I was just discussing the Royal Academy exhibition with your daughter. Her insights are most illuminating." Lady Vance's gaze darted between them, clearly struggling to make sense of the scene before her. How delightful! Elara has always been fond of art, though I fear her observations may lack the sophistication to truly interest someone of your background, Your Grace. Elara felt a familiar pang at her mother's dismissive tone, a subtle diminishment she had endured for years as her marriage prospects faded. "On the contrary," the Duke replied, his voice cooling perceptibly, his unwavering stare making Lady Vance visibly uncomfortable. "Miss Vance's understanding rivals that of many so-called experts of my acquaintance. You must be very proud of her accomplishments." Lady Vance blinked, clearly unaccustomed to hearing her eldest daughter praised by anyone, let alone one of the most powerful men in England. "Yes, of course," she stammered. "Elara has always been studious." The Duke turned back to Elara, ignoring the obvious discomfort his presence had created. "Miss Vance, might I prevail upon you to accompany me to the conservatory at Kew Gardens tomorrow? The tropical specimens are particularly fine this season." Aware of her mother's widening eyes, Elara hesitated only briefly before nodding. The invitation was a clear, public statement, further escalating his intentions. "I should like that very much, Your Grace." "Excellent. Shall we say 11 o'clock? I will send my carriage." With that, he bowed to both ladies and took his leave, his departure leaving a vacuum of stunned silence in its wake. Lady Vance sank into a chair, fanning herself vigorously. "Elara," she breathed when the front door had closed behind him. "What in heaven's name is happening? First the roses, now a private call, and an invitation to Q," Lady Vance continued, her voice rising in bewilderment. "The Duke of Blackwood is courting you." "It would appear so, Mother," Elara replied, still trying to absorb the reality of the situation herself. "But why, after all these years of being overlooked, to suddenly attract the attention of the most eligible bachelor in England? It defies all understanding." Lady Vance wrung her hands. Elara winced at her mother's artless candor. "Thank you for that assessment, Mother." Lady Vance had the grace to look abashed. "Forgive me, my dear. I did not mean, that is to say, you have always been accomplished and well-bred, of course, but at your age—" "Yes, Mother, I am quite aware of my age," Elara interrupted with uncharacteristic sharpness, "as I believe is the Duke." "But what can he possibly want?" Lady Vance persisted, bewilderment evident in every line of her face. "A man of his standing must surely be seeking a young, fertile bride to secure his line, not—" Elara rose, suddenly weary of the conversation, her dignity firmly in place. "Perhaps, Mother, he wants what any man seeks in a potential wife: companionship, understanding, and mutual respect. Perhaps he values qualities that are not so easily defined by youth or status." "At your age," Lady Vance repeated, seemingly unable to move past this central fact. "It's unprecedented." "Many things about the Duke appear to be unprecedented," Elara replied softly. "If you'll excuse me, I believe I shall rest before dinner. Tomorrow promises to be eventful." She left her mother still fanning herself, a picture of utter confusion. As she climbed the stairs to her bedchamber, Elara's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. In the privacy of her room, she sat at her dressing table, studying her reflection with new eyes. The face that looked back at her was handsome rather than beautiful by society's narrow standards, strong features softened by intelligent eyes and a generous mouth. Time had etched fine lines at the corners of those eyes and across her brow, but it also bestowed a certain dignity, a gravity that her younger self had lacked. Could he truly see something worthwhile in this face? She whispered to her reflection, a fragile sense of renewed self-worth beginning to form, daring to hope where hope had long since died. Sleep proved elusive that night. Elara lay awake, replaying the Duke's words in her mind, searching for hidden meanings or subtle mockery, and finding none. His manner had been direct, his gaze sincere, his intentions stated with a clarity that left little room for misinterpretation. Yet still, she doubted. 20 years of watching from the sidelines, as other women were chosen, courted, and wed, had left deep scars on her heart. The idea that she, overlooked, unmarriageable Elara Vance, might have captured the attention of the most sought-after bachelor in England seemed more fantasy than reality. "He called me, too reserved," a voice echoed from her past, a suitor from her early 20s, his polite dismissal stinging even now. He said I lacked the vivacity he sought. The memory made her fear being misunderstood, or, worse, merely being a passing caprice. Morning brought no respite from her confusion, as her maid, Bennett, helped her dress for the promised excursion to Kew Gardens. Selecting a walking gown of deep teal that complemented her coloring, Elara found herself trembling with a combination of anticipation and dread. "You look lovely, miss," Bennett assured her, arranging a modest hat atop Elara's carefully styled hair. "Thank you, Bennett," Elara replied, managing a small smile, "though I fear lovely may be an overstatement at my age." "Nonsense, miss," the maid replied loyally, her tone firm. "There's more to beauty than youth, and if I may be so bold, miss, the Duke seems to have recognized that fact. A man like him, he knows true worth when he sees it." Bennett's simple, honest praise brought a small measure of comfort to Elara's anxious heart, even as the magnificent ducal carriage arrived precisely at 11. The following morning dawned with the quiet anticipation of a new beginning. Precisely at 11, a magnificent conveyance of gleaming black lacquer, emblazoned with the ducal crest, rolled to a stop before Vance's house. Elara watched from the drawing-room window, a mix of anticipation and dread churning within her. The footman who emerged to open the carriage door was a study in impeccable livery and deferential politeness, treating her with an unspoken reverence usually reserved for women of much higher station. It all felt impossibly surreal, a scene from a fanciful novel, not her own quiet life. Lord Thorne was waiting at the grand entrance to Kew Gardens, a figure commanding attention even amidst the bustling morning crowd. Dressed in a perfectly tailored morning coat, he exuded an aura of quiet strength. As Elara descended from the carriage, she observed a flicker of something in his piercing gray eyes, a spark of admiration, unmistakable and warm, that sent an unfamiliar heat coursing through her veins, a soft echo of Bennet's loyal words that morning. "Miss Vance." He greeted her, bowing over her hand with perfect courtesy. "You are punctual, a quality I find admirable." Elara managed a curtsy, her voice steady despite the quickening of her heart. "Your Grace, thank you for the invitation. It has been some years since I last visited Kew." "Then we shall remedy that oversight immediately," he declared, offering his arm. "The Palm House awaits, and I believe you will find the orchid collection particularly impressive." As they strolled through the magnificent glass structures, housing exotic plants from across the empire, Elara gradually felt her tension easing. Lord Thorne proved a knowledgeable guide, sharing insights gleaned from his own travels, and listening with genuine interest to her observations about the rare specimens. The conversation flowed easily between them, a welcome respite from the usual stilted pleasantries of society. They paused beneath the soaring glass dome of the Palm House, surrounded by towering tropical specimens that created the illusion of a far-distant land. "It's rather like stepping into another world," Elara remarked, tilting her head back to admire the architectural marvel above them. "Indeed," he agreed, though his gaze remained fixed on her upturned face rather than the surroundings. "Miss Vance, may I speak frankly?" Thorne asked, his voice low, drawing her attention back to him. Elara lowered her gaze to meet his, her heart quickening at the intensity she found there. "Of course, Your Grace. I sense that you harbor doubts about my intentions," he said directly, "that perhaps you suspect some ulterior motive behind my interest in you." Elara hesitated, torn between honesty and decorum. "You must admit, Your Grace, that your attention is unexpected. I would be naive not to question it." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Then allow me to address those doubts directly. I am 38 years old, Miss Vance. I have spent the past 15 years fending off matchmaking mamas and their increasingly desperate attempts to secure my title for their daughters. I have been paraded before every eligible young lady from Land's End to John O'Groats, and I have found them universally tedious, pretty faces concealing empty minds, or worse, calculating ambitions. My broken engagement to Lady Clarissa Ashworth years ago was a stark lesson in that particular brand of ambition. She made it quite plain she desired only the title, the fortune, not the man. And then, at yet another interminable ball, I encountered a woman who stood apart from the usual preening and posturing. A woman who watched the proceedings with clear-eyed intelligence and a hint of well-earned cynicism. Thorne took a step closer, his voice lowering. And whose conversation, when I finally engineered an opportunity to experience it, revealed depth and substance rather than the usual vapid pleasantries. Elara felt her cheeks warming under his steady gaze. "You make me sound far more interesting than I am, Your Grace." "On the contrary," he replied, "I suspect I have only begun to discover how interesting you truly are, Miss Vance. And I find myself eager to continue that discovery, if you will permit it." His words, so direct and sincere, banished the last lingering echoes of her past rejections. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a group of fashionable ladies, whose exclamations of surprise at encountering the Duke of Blackwood in such circumstances echoed through the humid air of the Palm House. "Your Grace," called Lady Winfield, a notorious gossip whose daughter had failed to secure the Duke's interest during the previous season. "What an unexpected pleasure to find you at Kew on this fine morning." Her gaze moved to Elara, and a look of poorly concealed disdain crossed her features. "And Miss Vance as well. How unusual." The Duke's expression cooled perceptibly. "Lady Winfield, ladies. Miss Vance and I were just discussing the remarkable architectural achievements of Decimus Burton. You'll forgive us if we continue our tour." Without waiting for a response, he guided Elara toward a less crowded section of the glass house, his hand warm and reassuring at the small of her back. "I apologize for the interruption," he murmured. "It seems we cannot escape society's eyes even here." "It is to be expected," Elara replied pragmatically. "Your movements are always of interest, and my presence at your side is noteworthy." "Because of your age?" he asked bluntly. Elara blinked at his directness. "Yes," she admitted after a moment. "Among other factors, such as my lack of beauty, fortune, or particularly distinguished family connections. The fact that I have been considered firmly on the shelf for at least a decade." The Duke's expression hardened. "The tone's assessment of worth is remarkably shallow. Beauty fades, fortunes rise and fall, and distinguished families often produce undistinguished progeny." As for being on the shelf, he made no attempt to hide his disdain for the phrase, "I find that particular social construct both arbitrary and idiotic." Despite herself, Elara laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and delight that echoed pleasantly in the humid air. "Your Grace, I believe you may be the first person I've encountered who sees it that way." His expression softened at her laughter. "Then the rest of society is blind. Tell me, Miss Vance, if you had not been constrained by convention, what would you have done with your life?" The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure I understand." "If marriage had not been the only acceptable path for a woman of your standing," he clarified, "what pursuits might have captured your interest?" Elara considered the question thoughtfully as they continued their stroll among the exotic foliage. "I would have liked to travel," she said finally, a wistful note in her voice. "To see the art and architecture I've only read about. To experience different cultures and landscapes firsthand." "Where would you go first?" he prompted, genuinely interested. "Italy, I think," she replied, her eyes lighting with enthusiasm. "Florence, Rome, Venice, to see the works of the Renaissance masters in their original settings. And after Italy, Greece, perhaps. Egypt. The ancient civilizations have always fascinated me." She paused, looking somewhat embarrassed. "I sound rather like a schoolgirl with fanciful dreams." "Not at all," the Duke countered firmly. "You sound like someone with a mind eager for knowledge and experience, qualities I find infinitely more attractive than the vapid accomplishments society prizes in its young ladies." They had reached a secluded corner of the glass house, sheltered from curious eyes by a stand of bamboo. The Duke turned to face her, his expression serious. "Miss Vance, Elara, if I may. I wish to be entirely clear about my intentions. I am not playing a game. I am not seeking to cause a scandal. I am pursuing you because, in the brief time of our acquaintance, you have engaged my mind and intrigued my heart in ways no other woman has managed in 38 years of existence." He took her gloved hand in his. "I recognize that my attention places you in an uncomfortable position. Society will whisper. Your family will worry, and you yourself may doubt the sincerity of my regard. But I ask only that you grant me the opportunity to demonstrate that regard through continued acquaintance." Elara felt breathless, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Your Grace," she began, her voice a tremor. "Richard," he corrected gently. "When we are not in formal company, I should like to hear my name on your lips." "Richard," she repeated, the intimate address sending a shiver through her voice. "I fear you may be courting disappointment. I am not young, not beautiful in the conventional sense. The old insecurities, deeply ingrained from years of subtle dismissal and painful rejections, resurfaced, making her caution him, despite the profound hope swelling in her chest. "You are beautiful to me," he interrupted, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. "Your intelligence shines in your eyes. Your dignity lends grace to every movement. Your smile, when you deign to bestow it, transforms your entire countenance." He stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to his clothing. "I have watched countless debutantes parade their youth and superficial charms before me, Elara. Not one of them has moved me as you did with a single dance, a single conversation." Elara felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her with such unvarnished admiration, not even in her youth. "Society will be merciless," she warned softly, the ingrained caution of decades asserting itself. "Society has always been merciless," he countered, his voice steady. "To you for remaining unmarried, to me for refusing to choose a bride to their liking. Perhaps it is time we both stopped allowing its cruelty to dictate our happiness." The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Then, with a gentle squeeze of her hand, Richard stepped back, restoring a proper distance between them. "I have overwhelmed you," he observed, reading her expression with uncanny accuracy. "Forgive me, I did not intend to press my case so forcefully on this occasion." "No," Elara replied, finding her voice. "That is, I appreciate your candor. It is refreshing after so many years of polite fictions." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features and sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Then perhaps we might continue this conversation over luncheon. I have taken the liberty of arranging a private meal in the director's residence. He is an old friend, and has kindly offered the use of his dining room." The remainder of their visit to Kew passed in a pleasant haze for Elara. The private luncheon proved delightful, with conversation flowing easily between discussions of art, literature, and philosophy. The Duke, Richard, revealed himself to be widely read and thoughtful, with opinions that challenged rather than merely echoed the prevailing wisdom of their class. As he handed her back into his carriage for the return journey to Vance House, he asked quietly, "Might I call on you again tomorrow?" "Yes," Elara replied without hesitation, surprising herself with the readiness of her answer. "I should like that very much." His smile, warm and genuine, stayed with her long after she had returned home to face her family's curious questioning about the outing, a beacon of hope against her lingering doubts. That evening, Arthur cornered her in the library, his expression troubled. "Elara, what exactly is transpiring between you and Blackwood? The entire town is talking." "I am not entirely certain myself," she admitted, selecting a volume from the shelf to avoid meeting her brother's concerned gaze. "He has expressed interest in a continued acquaintance." "Interest?" Arthur repeated skeptically. "Elara, the man is courting you openly and without apology. It is unprecedented." She finally turned to face him. "Do you find it so impossible to believe that someone might genuinely desire my company, Arthur?" Her brother had the grace to look abashed. "Of course not. You are intelligent, kind, and possessed of more substance than most women half your age. But Blackwood, his reputation for fastidiousness, for impossible standards, the fact that he has rejected every suitable match for 15 years, only to suddenly show interest in—" He stopped abruptly. In a spinster of 40, Elara finished for him, her voice calm despite the sting. "Yes, it is unexpected. I have said as much to him directly." "And what was his response?" A small smile touched her lips as she recalled Richard's words in the Palm House. "He said that society's assessment of worth is remarkably shallow, and that he finds the concept of being on the shelf both arbitrary and idiotic." Arthur's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That does not sound like the Blackwood I have heard described at my club." "Perhaps," Elara suggested gently, "the Duke that Ton believes it knows is not the man himself, but rather the title they all covet." Her brother studied her face intently. "You like him, don't you?" he observed, sounding faintly astonished. Elara withdrew her hand. "I find his company stimulating," she acknowledged carefully. "His conversation is intelligent, his opinions thoughtful, and his manner refreshingly direct." Arthur ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he had maintained since boyhood. "Elara, I only wish to protect you from potential hurt. You have endured enough. If Blackwood is sincere, then I could not be more delighted for you. But if this is some passing fancy on his part, "Then I shall endure it as I have endured everything else," she replied with quiet dignity. "But Arthur, what if it is not? What if after all these years I have encountered someone who sees me, truly sees me, for who I am? Would you have me reject that possibility out of fear?" Her brother's expression softened. "No," he admitted finally. "No, I would not. But promise me you will proceed with caution. Your heart has been preserved intact for 40 years. I would not see it broken now." "I promise," she assured him, though in truth she feared it might already be too late for caution. The seed of hope that Richard had planted in her heart was already taking root, growing stronger with each encounter, each conversation, each glimpse of the man beneath the ducal title. As she lay in her bedchamber that night, gazing out at the moonlit garden, Elara knew that the cautious part of her that had promised Arthur to proceed slowly was rapidly losing ground to a dangerous, exhilarating belief that something truly extraordinary was unfolding. It might already be too late for caution, indeed. Over the following weeks, London society watched in fascinated disbelief as the Duke of Blackwood's courtship of Miss Elara Vance continued with unwavering purpose. He called at Vance House almost daily, sent flowers and books with thoughtful notes, and escorted her to exhibitions, concerts, and even the opera, appearing utterly indifferent to the whispers and stares their appearances together provoked. For Elara, who had spent decades in the shadows of society, the sudden spotlight was both exhilarating and terrifying. She found herself scrutinized at every turn, her gowns, her hairstyle, her conversation, all subject to unprecedented attention and often cruel commentary. "I heard Lady Winfield say it must be some sort of wager," Charlotte confided, as she helped Elara prepare for an evening at the theater. "That Lord Hartwell must have challenged Blackwood to court the most unlikely woman in London." Elara's hand stilled in the act of fastening her earrings. "And what did you say to that?" "I told her that if the Duke had made such a wager, he would have chosen someone truly objectionable. Perhaps Lady Winfield herself," Charlotte replied with uncharacteristic sharpness. "Honestly, Elara, the jealousy is palpable. Half the mothers in London have spent years throwing their daughters at Blackwood without success. And now he has chosen you. It's driving them to distraction." "Chosen is perhaps too strong a word," Elara cautioned, though her heart warmed at her sister-in-law's defense. "He enjoys my company, that is all," Charlotte snorted delicately. "A man like the Duke of Blackwood does not escort a woman to the opera merely because he enjoys her company. He is courting you, Elara. The only question is when he will make his intentions official." Elara turned from the mirror, her expression troubled. "Charlotte, do you not find it strange that after all these years of being virtually invisible to society, I should suddenly attract the attention of the most eligible man in England?" Her sister-in-law studied her thoughtfully. "What I find strange is that it took someone of Blackwood's perception to recognize your worth when it has been evident to your family all along." The simple sincerity of the statement brought unexpected tears to Elara's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening at the Royal Theatre, seated in the Duke's private box, Elara was acutely aware of the opera glasses directed their way from all quarters of the house. The production was Verdi's La Traviata, but she suspected that for most of the audience, the real drama was unfolding in their box, where the Duke of Blackwood sat in close proximity to a woman 20 years past her debut. "You seem distracted," Richard observed during the interval, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I am sorry," she apologized. "It is difficult to focus when one is the subject of such avid observation." His gaze swept the theater, taking note of the many faces turned in their direction. "Would you prefer to leave and give them even more to gossip about?" "No," she replied with a small smile. "I shall endure." Richard's expression darkened. "You should not have to endure an evening at the opera, Elara. Not because of society's petty malice." She placed a gloved hand briefly on his arm, a gesture of intimacy that would not have gone unnoticed by their observers. "I am not as fragile as I appear, Richard. I have weathered the tonne's indifference for 20 years. I can certainly weather its attention now." His expression softened as he looked down at her hand on his arm. "Your resilience is yet another quality I admire," he said quietly. though I find myself increasingly incensed by the slights you have endured all these years." The second act of La Traviata was about to begin, but the real drama, for many, unfolded in Lord Thorne's private box. Just as Elara felt a fragile peace settling upon her, the door swung open to admit Lord and Lady Kavanaugh. Lady Kavanaugh, a woman whose own daughter had spectacularly failed to capture the Duke's interest the previous season, fixed Elara with a cold, assessing gaze. "Your Grace!" Lord Kavanaugh greeted, bowing stiffly, his eyes darting between Elara and Thorne. "Miss Vance, what a surprise to see you at the opera. Most commendable, truly." Lady Kavanaugh's smile was thin, not reaching her eyes. "Indeed. How admirable to maintain such interests at your age, Miss Vance. Most ladies in your position would have retreated from society long ago." Elara met her gaze evenly, years of practice allowing her to keep her expression serene. "I have never seen the virtue in retreating, Lady Kavanaugh," she replied, her voice calm. "Life has much to offer at every age, if one remains open to its possibilities." Richard's eyes, watching her, warmed with approval. Then, in a gesture that sent a jolt through Elara and caused Lady Kavanaugh's eyes to widen in shock, Richard placed his hand over Elara's where it still rested on his arm. It was intimate, possessive, a clear public declaration. "Indeed," Richard agreed, his voice cool and laced with a subtle edge. "A philosophy more should adopt, in my opinion." Lord Kavanaugh, sensing the escalating tension, made their excuses with barely concealed haste, ushering his flustered wife from the box. As the door clicked shut behind the retreating Kavanaughs, Richard turned to Elara, his expression softening. "You handled that beautifully," he murmured, his thumb gently tracing the back of her gloved hand. "Most would have withered under Lady Kavanaugh's barbs." Elara offered a small, weary smile. "Years of practice, Richard," she replied softly, though in truth the barbs had seemed far less painful with him beside her. His steady presence, the unexpected warmth of his hand over hers, had been a shield against society's casual cruelty. For the first time, she truly understood the profound difference it made to face the world not alone, but with someone who saw her, valued her, and stood by her. It was a revelation, this quiet strength she drew from his proximity, a deepening bond woven through shared defiance. Later that evening, as Richard escorted Elara to her door, the carriage lamps casting long shadows on the steps of Vance House, he paused. His usual composure seemed to waver, a rare hesitation flickering in his gray eyes. "Elara," he began, his voice a low rumble, "I wonder if you might consider accompanying me to Blackwood Manor this weekend." Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. An invitation to his ancestral home. A private call was one thing, flowers and books mere tokens. Even public appearances at cultural events, while scandalous, could be dismissed as the eccentricity of a duke known for his unconventional tastes. But an invitation to Blackwood, to meet his family and closest friends, that was a declaration of serious intent that could not be misconstrued, a threshold she had never dared to imagine crossing. "I host a small house party each spring for a select circle of friends and family," he continued, his gaze steady. "I should very much like you to attend." Elara stared at him, stunned, the full weight of his meaning settling upon her. This was it. This was everything. "Richard, are you certain?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper as she searched his face in the soft, uncertain glow of the carriage lamps. "Such an invitation will be seen as precisely what it is," he interrupted gently, his expression firming with renewed resolve. "A clear statement of my regard and intentions. I am weary of the speculation, Elara. I wish to make my feelings plain not only to you but to all of society." His words, though quiet, carried the undeniable force of his will, cutting through the London night and the buzzing whispers that followed them. He was not merely playing a game, he was laying down a gauntlet. Her heart raced, a frantic drum against her ribs. The sheer audacity, the unwavering determination in his gaze, left her breathless. He truly meant it. "And what are those feelings?" Elara asked, the question escaping her lips almost involuntarily, her voice trembling. Richard took her hand, his fingers strong and warm, and raised it slowly to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. A spark, almost an electric current, passed between them. "I believe you know," he said softly, his voice a low, intimate caress that sent shivers down her spine. "But if you require the words, Elara, I shall speak them here and now, regardless of who might witness." Her breath hitched. The words, the truth that lay just beneath the surface of his gaze, were almost audible, hanging heavy in the cool night air. The weight of it, the sheer, unexpected magnitude of his implied declaration, was overwhelming. Elara shook her head quickly, a flush rising to her cheeks, her mind reeling. "No, not here, not like this," she whispered, her gaze falling from his. To hear such a profound declaration amidst the gaslights and potential onlookers felt too vulnerable, too public, for a truth so deeply personal. Richard's expression gentled with understanding, acknowledging her modesty. "Then say you will come to Blackwood," he pressed softly, his voice a quiet plea. "Allow me to introduce you to those dearest to me. Let me show you the place that has shaped me, for better or worse." The invitation represented a threshold, Elara knew, a point of no return. If she accepted, she would be publicly acknowledging the seriousness of their connection, inviting both increased scrutiny and inevitable disappointment if the relationship failed to culminate in marriage. Yet, looking into Richard's steady gray eyes that saw her, not the spinster, not the overlooked wallflower, she found she could not refuse. Whatever happened, whatever pain might lie ahead, she would not deny herself this chance at a happiness she had long since ceased to believe possible. "Yes," she said finally, her voice imbued with a quiet bravery she hadn't known she possessed. Then, with growing certainty, "Yes, Richard, I will come to Blackwood." Richard's smile, rare and transformative, illuminated his austere features. It was a genuine expression of pure, unadulterated joy that stole her breath. "You have made me very happy, Elara," he said simply, his voice a low, rich tone that resonated deep within her. Then, with a formal bow that belied the intimacy of the moment they had just shared, he bid her good night and returned to his waiting carriage. As the carriage rolled away, its lamps receding into the darkness, Elara ascended the steps of Vance's house. She could feel the lingering warmth of his hand on hers, the ghost of his smile in her mind, and the weight of his gaze following her retreat, warm and steady as a physical touch. A profound sense of wonder settled over her, quiet and fragile, yet undeniably real. Inside Harrington House, Elara found Arthur waiting in the entrance hall, his expression a mixture of concern and poorly concealed curiosity. He had clearly heard the carriage depart, and perhaps seen more than he let on. "Well?" he prompted, as she handed her wrap to the waiting footman. What did Blackwood have to say for himself tonight? Elara turned to her brother, a small, private smile touching her lips. "He has invited me to Blackwood Manor for his spring house party," she replied, still somewhat dazed by the invitation and its profound implications. Arthur's eyebrows shot up, his jaw dropping slightly. "Good Lord," he breathed, the surprise evident in his voice. "And you accepted?" "I did," Elara confirmed, her gaze steady. Arthur studied her face intently for a long moment, then stepped forward and took her hands in his. "Then it appears his intentions are serious indeed," he said, his voice softening with a genuine emotion Elara rarely saw. "Elara, if this is what you want, if Blackwood is what you want, then you have my full support. Whatever whispers or obstacles society may throw in your path, know that your family stands with you." Tears pricked at Elara's eyes at this unexpected declaration, a powerful balm after years of subtle familial diminishment. "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered, squeezing his hands gratefully. Arthur cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious, a faint flush rising to his cheeks. "Yes, well," he mumbled, "it's about time someone recognized your worth, even if it had to be the most intimidating man in England." Elara laughed softly, a genuine sound of relief and affection. His words, awkward yet heartfelt, resonated deeply within her, a final, affirming echo of Richard's own unwavering belief. It was as if a heavy cloak of invisibility, worn for decades, had finally been lifted, revealing a self she had almost forgotten existed. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life she felt truly seen, truly valued, and utterly supported. The weekend of the Blackwood house party arrived with unseasonable warmth, as though spring itself had conspired to make the occasion perfect. Elara traveled to Kent in Richard's magnificent personal carriage, a gleaming black lacquer conveyance emblazoned with the ducal crest. Propriety and Arthur's protective instincts demanded she be accompanied, so Lady Lillian Vance, her sister-in-law, sat opposite her, chattering excitedly. Elara, however, was lost in her own thoughts, gazing out at the passing Kent countryside. She reflected on the surreal nature of what she was doing, approaching the ancestral seat of one of England's oldest dukedoms, not as a mere visitor, but as a potential duchess. The very thought seemed absurd, a fantastical dream from which she expected to wake. Yet here she was, responding to an invitation that could only have one meaning. As the carriage crested a gentle hill, Blackwood Manor came into view. It was a magnificent Palladian mansion, its limestone facade gleaming golden in the afternoon sun, nestled amid rolling parkland that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Heavens!" Charlotte breathed, leaning forward for a better view, her voice hushed with awe. "It's even grander than they say." Elara could only nod, momentarily overwhelmed. The sheer scale, the undeniable presence of the ancient estate was breathtaking. This was Richard's world, a world of immense wealth and power, centuries of history carved into stone. The reality of being a potential duchess, of marrying into such a legacy, settled upon her with a mix of awe and trepidation. Could she truly belong here? As the carriage rolled to a stop before the imposing entrance, Richard himself emerged to greet them. He descended the wide stone steps with an eager stride that belied his usual reserve, a genuine warmth radiating from him. "Elara," he said warmly, his voice a deep, welcoming tone as he reached the carriage door. He offered his hand, helping her from the luxurious interior with gentle hands. "Welcome to Blackwood." For a moment they stood gazing at each other, oblivious to the array of liveried servants on the steps, or Charlotte being handed down behind them. It was a private moment suspended in public space, a silent acknowledgement of the significance of her arrival. Then, recollecting himself, Richard turned to greet Charlotte with correct, if cooler, courtesy, before escorting them both into the entrance hall. The interior of Blackwood Manor was every bit as impressive as its exterior. Soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and walls hung with ancestral portraits and priceless works of art. Yet, despite its grandeur, there was a surprising warmth to the house that Elara had not expected. It felt less like a museum and more like a cherished residence, a sense that it was a home rather than merely a showpiece of aristocratic wealth. "I've had rooms prepared for you in the East Wing," Richard informed them as footmen moved forward to collect their luggage. His gaze met Elara's, a subtle gesture of consideration passing between them. "The views of the rose garden are particularly fine at this time of year, Elara. I thought you might appreciate them." The personal consideration, the quiet thoughtfulness behind his choice, touched her deeply. "Thank you, Richard," she replied softly, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. That was most thoughtful. His expression softened at her use of his given name, still a novelty that seemed to please him each time she employed it. "I shall leave you to rest and refresh yourselves before dinner. The other guests will be arriving throughout the afternoon." As a maid led them to their rooms, Charlotte leaned close to whisper, her eyes wide with excitement. "Did you see how he looked at you, Elara? If the man is not in love, I shall eat my best bonnet." Elara shushed her, though her heart leapt at the observation, a dangerous, fragile hope taking root. After resting briefly, Elara began to prepare for dinner, selecting a gown of deep amethyst silk that highlighted her auburn hair, now showing threads of silver at the temples, and brought warmth to her complexion. Descending to the drawing room, where pre-dinner drinks were being served, Elara was acutely conscious of the scrutiny she would face from Richard's inner circle. These were not the general society whose opinion she had learned to disregard, but people whose judgment mattered to the man who had, against all odds, come to matter deeply to her. Richard came forward immediately to greet them, looking resplendent in evening attire that emphasized his commanding height and athletic build. "Elara, Charlotte," he said warmly, "allow me to introduce you to my guests." The group assembled in the drawing room was smaller and less intimidating than Elara had feared. Just 8 people, including Lord James Hartwell, whom she recognized as Richard's oldest friend from Cambridge days, Richard's younger sister, Lady Seraphina Thorne, a striking woman in her early 30s, his cousin, Lord Henry Thorne and his wife, and 2 other couples who appeared to be long-standing family friends. To Elara's surprise and relief, the reception she received was uniformly cordial, with Richard's sister, in particular, going out of her way to make her feel welcome. "My brother has spoken of little else but you for weeks," Lady Seraphina confided, her eyes twinkling as they took seats together before dinner. "I was beginning to think you must be some sort of paragon." Elara laughed softly, genuinely amused. "I assure you I am nothing of the sort." Lady Seraphina, however, merely studied her with shrewd blue eyes, the same piercing shade as Richard's, Elara noted. "I think not," she said finally, her tone firm and discerning. "Richard does not exaggerate, nor does he act on impulse or emotion. If he has singled you out, Miss Vance, it is because he sees qualities in you that are genuinely exceptional." Elara was deeply affected by this affirmation, a profound sense of validation washing over her. To hear such words, not from Richard, but from his own discerning sister, was a powerful confirmation of his sincerity and her own intrinsic worth. It was a balm to decades of quiet diminishment. Before Elara could fully respond to this remarkable statement, dinner was announced. Richard appeared at her elbow to escort her into the dining room, his hand lightly at her waist. "My sister has not overwhelmed you, I hope," he murmured, a hint of amusement in his voice, as they processed down the corridor. "Seraphina can be rather direct." Elara smiled up at him, feeling a lightness she hadn't known in years. "Not at all," she assured him. "It's refreshing, actually. Directness seems to be a family trait." He smiled down at her, his eyes warm, one you share if I recall our early conversations correctly. Their easy, affectionate banter, the subtle glances and shared humor, underscored a compatibility that ran deeper than superficial charm. The dinner that followed was unlike any social experience Elara had ever known. Seated at Richard's right hand, the position of honor usually reserved for the highest-ranking lady present, she found herself at the center of genuine, interested conversation rather than polite dismissal. Richard's friends and family, far from being aloof, engaged her on topics ranging from literature to politics, listening to her opinions with actual attention rather than mere courtesy. They asked questions, truly heard her answers, and responded with thoughtful comments that invited further discussion. It was a revelation, this unexpected acceptance, this feeling of being valued for her mind and her contributions. Most surprising of all was the way Richard himself deferred to her views, drawing her into discussions and valuing her contributions in a way she had never experienced in society at large. During a momentary lull in the general conversation, he leaned in, his voice soft and intimate, meant only for her. "You see," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "This is why I wished you to come to Blackwood, Elara, so that you might see yourself as I see you, not as London society has labeled you, but as the remarkable woman you truly are." Elara's cheeks warmed at his sincerity, a profound sense of gratitude mingling with the blossoming hope within her. It was a direct address to the deepest insecurities she harbored, a tender, powerful affirmation. "You are very kind, Richard," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. He smiled, a confident, knowing expression. "Not kind," he corrected gently, his eyes holding hers. "Observant, Elara, and increasingly certain that I have made the right choice." His words were not flattery, but a statement of fact, born of careful consideration and deep conviction. It strengthened Elara's belief in his sincerity. reassuring her that his actions were deliberate, not a passing whim. He saw her, truly saw her, and chose her for reasons that transcended superficiality. After dinner, the party retired to the music room, where Lady Seraphina was prevailed upon to play the pianoforte. As the evening progressed, Elara found herself drawn into the warm, accepting circle of Richard's closest connections. She was accepted not as an oddity or an object of curiosity, but as someone of genuine interest and worth. It was a revelation, this glimpse of what life might be like, freed from the constraints and judgments that had defined her existence for so long. Here, in the intimate setting of Blackwood Manor, she was not the spinster or poor Miss Vance, but simply Elara, valued for her thoughts, her conversation, her very self. A peaceful contentment settled over her, profound and unexpected. As the evening drew to a close, Richard escorted her to the foot of the grand staircase, lingering behind the others as they made their way to their respective rooms. "You seem to enjoy yourself," he observed, his voice low and intimate in the quiet of the great hall. "Very much," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "Your friends and family are most welcoming." "They see what I see," he replied simply, his expression softening further. Then, glancing around to ensure they were momentarily unobserved, he reached for her hand. Instead of raising it to his lips, as propriety dictated, he pressed it gently against his heart, a gesture of profound tenderness that caused her breath to catch in her throat. "Sleep well, Elara," he whispered, his eyes still fixed on hers. "Tomorrow, I should like to show you the grounds, if the weather permits." The gesture, though subtle, carried a weight of affection and vulnerability that left her momentarily speechless. "I should like that," she managed finally, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Good night, Richard." As she ascended the staircase, she could feel his gaze following her, warm and steady as a physical touch, imprinting the moment upon her memory. In her room, preparing for bed with Bennet's quiet assistance, Elara found herself humming softly. It was an unconscious expression of a happiness so unexpected, so complete, that it seemed almost too fragile to acknowledge directly. She caught her reflection in the looking-glass, a faint smile on her lips, a new light in her eyes. This joy, this burgeoning hope, felt like a precious, delicate thing, a butterfly newly emerged from its chrysalis, beautiful but vulnerable. She cherished the feeling, allowing it to settle within her, warming her from the inside out. Could this truly be her new normal? Could such profound contentment truly last? The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect for the promised tour of the estate. After breakfast, Richard appeared at Elara's side, his eyes bright, with an eagerness he rarely displayed in public. "Shall we explore?" he suggested, offering his arm, his usual composure barely concealing his excitement. They set out across the immaculate lawns, Richard pointing out features of the landscape with evident pride and knowledge. It soon became clear to Elara that Blackwood was not merely a symbol of his rank and wealth, but a living entity to which he was deeply connected. A passion that stirred a similar chord within her. "My father saw the estate primarily as a source of revenue," he explained, as they paused at the edge of a small lake, watching swans glide across the still surface. "But for me, it has always been more than that. These lands, these people, they are a responsibility, yes, but also a privilege, to be part of something that stretches back centuries and will continue long after I am gone." He spoke with a quiet reverence, a profound sense of stewardship that revealed a vulnerable, deeply rooted aspect of his character. "You speak of it with such passion," Elara observed, watching his face as he gazed across his domain. "It's clear how much Blackwood means to you." His expression softened as he turned to look at her, a rare vulnerability in his gray eyes. "It is my home, Elara. The one place where I have always felt truly myself, unconstrained by the expectations and formalities of society. I wanted you to see it, to understand this part of me." The simple honesty of the statement touched her deeply. It was an invitation not just to his home, but into his very soul. "Thank you for sharing it with me," she said softly, her hand tightening on his arm. "It helps me see you more clearly. Not just the Duke that London knows, but the man behind the title." "That," he replied, his voice low and fervent, "is precisely what I hoped for." So few people look beyond the dukedom to see the man. You have done so from the beginning, Elara. It is one of the many reasons I find myself increasingly drawn to you." They continued their walk, crossing a graceful stone bridge that arched elegantly over a narrow section of the lake. In the distance, Elara could see figures moving about the grounds, other guests enjoying the fine spring weather. But her attention was solely on Richard. "Richard," she began carefully, her voice betraying a hint of the anxiety that still simmered beneath her newfound happiness. "I must ask you something that has been troubling me." He glanced down at her, his expression open. "Anything," she gestured vaguely between them, encompassing their disparate worlds. "Are you certain about this? Society has expectations for a man in your position. A duke typically marries a young woman of impeccable lineage, someone who can provide heirs and manage a great household. I am 40 years old, Richard. The likelihood of your bearing children is reduced, but not impossible." He completed for her, his tone matter-of-fact, betraying no offense at her bluntness. "And while an heir is certainly desirable, Elara, it is not my primary consideration in choosing a wife." He led her to a secluded stone bench, positioned to overlook the serene lake and its surrounding gardens, his gaze never leaving hers, as though bracing for her final doubts before laying bare his heart. Richard led Elara to a stone bench, positioned to overlook the tranquil lake and its surrounding gardens. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle patterns on the backs of her hands, sending shivers up her arms despite the warmth of the day. "Elara," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I have spent 15 years watching young women of impeccable lineage parade before me, each more vacuous and calculating than the last. Their ambitions were transparent, their interest in me, a thinly veiled desire for my title and fortune. My experience with Lady Clarissa Ashworth cemented my cynicism, leaving me wary of ever opening myself to such a mercenary pursuit again." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "An heir is certainly desirable, and I believe, though the likelihood may be reduced, it is not impossible for us. But an heir is not my primary consideration in choosing a wife. What I seek is not an administrator, but a companion, someone whose conversation I enjoy, whose opinions I respect, whose presence brings me peace rather than obligation." Elara's heart quickened at the profound implication of his words. He saw her, truly saw her, beyond the societal checklist, but still she hesitated, the weight of decades of societal judgment pressing in. "Richard," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "you must know how people will talk. The tongue will be merciless. My age, my lack of fortune, they will never understand." Richard's expression hardened, his grip on her hands tightening with quiet intensity. "Let them talk," he replied, his voice firm. "I have never governed my life according to society's expectations, Elara. I see no reason to begin now, particularly when doing so would deny me the chance at genuine happiness. Their judgment holds no power over me, and it need hold none over you. Our happiness is ours alone to define." His gaze swept across the wide expanse of the lake and gardens, as though encompassing the entire world and dismissing its petty concerns. He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that caused her breath to catch in her throat, her gaze fixed on the object, a silent question in her eyes. "I had planned to wait until this evening, after the others had retired," he said, his voice betraying a rare nervousness, "but perhaps here, in this place that has witnessed the sweep of centuries, is more fitting." Opening the box, he revealed a magnificent emerald ring surrounded by sparkling diamonds, its antique setting, speaking of history and permanence. The stone gleamed, a vibrant green against the deep blue velvet. "This belonged to my grandmother, the 5th Duchess of Blackwood," he explained, his eyes never leaving Elara's face, a woman of remarkable intelligence and character, who defied convention in her own time. "I believe she would approve of my choice." With deliberate care, he slid from the bench to one knee before her, still holding her gaze. The serene backdrop of the lake and gardens seemed to hold its breath. "Elara Vance," he began, his voice rich with emotion, "you have brought light into my life where before there was only duty. You have shown me that true connection is possible, even for someone as guarded as myself. You see me, the man, not the title, and that is a gift beyond measure. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Elara stared at him, scarcely able to believe the moment was real. The image of young Mr. Caldwell dismissing her as too bookish, the sting of countless seasons of being overlooked, flashed through her mind. This man, this Duke, was offering her everything she had long thought impossible. Her voice trembled on the brink of tears. "Richard," she began, her voice a fragile whisper, "are you absolutely certain? The world will not understand." His expression, though joyful, remained steady, resolute. "I am not asking the world to marry me," he replied simply. "I am asking you." In that moment, looking into his unwavering gray eyes, Elara felt the last of her doubts dissolve, replaced by a profound certainty. Whatever challenges might lie ahead, whatever whispers might follow them, the chance to share her life with this remarkable man was worth any price. "Yes," she said softly then, with growing certainty, a radiant smile transforming her entire countenance. "Yes, Richard, I will marry you." The joy that flooded Richard's features was so naked, so unguarded, it stole her breath. Rising, he took the emerald ring from its velvet nest and, with a tender hand, slipped it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, as though it had been made for her. "My Duchess," he murmured, raising her fingers to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. Then, glancing around to ensure they were unobserved, in the privacy of that ancient garden, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle, reverent kiss to her lips. It was their first, a seal on the promise they had just exchanged. When they finally parted, Elara felt as though the world had shifted on its axis, that everything before this moment had been merely a prelude to the life now opening before her. "Shall we share our news with the others?" Richard asked, his eyes still bright with happiness. "Yes," Elara agreed, her heart full to overflowing. "Though I imagine your sister at least may have anticipated this development." He laughed, a free, joyful sound she had rarely heard from him. "Serafina has been hinting rather heavily that I should secure my happiness before you could change your mind about me." "Change my mind?" Elara echoed incredulously, as if that were possible. Hand in hand they walked back toward the house, where their news would be met first with delight from those closest to them, and later with shock and scandal by society at large. But in that moment, with Richard's strong fingers intertwined with hers, and the emerald gleaming on her hand, Elara found she cared not at all for what the world might think. She had spent 40 years living according to society's expectations and limitations, feeling invisible and unworthy. Now she would forge a new path, as the Duchess of Blackwood, yes, but more importantly, as a woman who had found love when she least expected it, with a man who valued her for exactly who she was. He saw her intelligence, her dignity, her quiet strength, qualities society had dismissed, but he cherished. This was her truth, and it was glorious. The news of their engagement spread through London society like wildfire, igniting a conflagration of gossip, speculation, and thinly veiled disbelief. Drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs buzzed with discussion of the unprecedented match, the most eligible duke in England, choosing as his bride a woman of 40, neither beautiful nor wealthy, who had long since been consigned to spinsterhood. "It must be some sort of bizarre infatuation," Lady Winfield declared to her circle of confidants over tea, her voice a venomous hiss. "Men of a certain age sometimes develop these peculiar fixations. It will pass, of course, but unfortunately not before he has bound himself to her permanently." "Perhaps she has bewitched him somehow," suggested another matron, whose own daughter had failed to secure the Duke's interest during the previous season. "They say her mother's family, the Ashworths, had connections to those mystical Romany travelers. Perhaps Lady Ashworth has taught her some dark arts to ensnare him." The malicious rumor, a desperate fabrication by Lady Ashworth to further smear Richard and Elara, added a chilling, scandalous layer to the whispers. Such whispers reached Elara's ears, of course. Servants talked, and Charlotte made it her business to report the most outrageous speculations with a mixture of indignation and dark humor, including Lady Ashworth's preposterous new rumors. Yet, to her own surprise, Elara found the gossip affected her far less than it might have done before. Her heart, once so vulnerable to such barbs, now felt shielded by Richard's unwavering regard. "Let them talk," she said to Charlotte, unconsciously echoing Richard's words. "In time, they will find some new scandal to occupy them. Their opinions are no longer my concern." Charlotte snorted delicately. "Indeed. They are simply vexed that you, whom they dismissed, have found such happiness." Elara smiled serenely. The engagement was brief by society standards, just 6 weeks, during which Elara found herself suddenly at the center of a whirlwind of activity. There were trousseau fittings, meetings with solicitors regarding settlements, consultations about the refurbishment of the Duchess's apartments at Blackwood, and countless other details that demanded attention. Through it all, Richard remained a steady presence, attentive, supportive, and increasingly demonstrative of his affection, particularly when they managed to steal moments alone. Elara discovered in herself a capacity for happiness she had thought long extinguished, a youthful joy that belied her 40 years. Her days were a blur of preparations, each one bringing her closer to a future she had only dared to dream. "You look younger every day," Arthur remarked one evening as they sat together in the library at Vance House. "I would never have believed it possible, but impending marriage appears to agree with you, sister." Elara smiled, touching the emerald ring that now adorned her finger. The stone felt warm against her skin. "Happiness agrees with me, Arthur. Something I had nearly forgotten was possible, something I had convinced myself was not meant for me." Her brother's expression softened. "You deserve it, Elara. No one deserves it more. To see you so radiant, it brings me immense relief and joy." He had truly come to terms with the unconventional match. The wedding itself was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, a concession to Richard's position rather than Elara's preference for a quieter, more intimate ceremony. The church was filled to capacity, though Elara knew many had come not to celebrate their union, but to witness what society considered a peculiar spectacle. Yet, as she walked down the aisle on Arthur's arm, her gaze fixed solely on Richard waiting at the altar, she found she cared not at all for the whispers that followed her progress. What mattered was the man before her, his strong, familiar silhouette, a beacon in the crowded church. Her world had narrowed to him, and him alone. Richard stood tall and commanding in his formal attire, his usually austere features transformed by an expression of such naked adoration that it caused murmurs to ripple through the congregation, quieting even the most persistent gossips. Their vows were exchanged with clear, steady voices, a promise not just of fidelity and support, but of a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. When Richard slipped the heavy gold band onto her finger to join the emerald engagement ring, his hands were gentle, his touch lingering longer than strictly necessary, a silent testament to the intimacy they had forged. His eyes, usually so guarded, now shone with an open, tender love that mirrored her own. "I now pronounce you man and wife," declared the bishop, his voice resonating through the solemn space. And with those words, Elara Vance became her grace, the Duchess of Blackwood. A transformation so complete and yet so unexpected that she felt momentarily dizzy with the reality of it. The solemnity of the moment, the weight of the title, the profound shift in her destiny, it all converged into a single, breathtaking realization. Her new life had truly begun. The reception that followed at Blackwood House, the Duke's London residence, was a study in contrasts. Genuine warmth from Richard's inner circle, mingling with barely concealed curiosity and skepticism from the broader society who had felt obligated to attend. Lady Winfield and Lady Ashworth were observed in a corner, exchanging resentful glances, their whispers sharp as daggers. But Elara found herself floating through the afternoon with a serene confidence. Richard's steady presence at her side was a shield against any potential barbs, his hand often finding hers, a quiet reassurance that their bond was unshakable. She met every curious gaze with a calm smile, knowing her truth was stronger than their judgment. "How are you faring, Duchess?" Richard murmured during a brief moment alone, his voice low, the new title sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. "Remarkably well," she replied honestly, "though I suspect many of our guests are still waiting for you to reveal this has all been an elaborate jest." Richard's eyes darkened, a flicker of his old cynicism surfacing, swiftly replaced by resolute tenderness. "They will wait a very long time, then," he said firmly, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "You are mine now, Elara, as I am yours. The rest of the world can go hang." His declaration was a quiet, intimate defiance, a promise that their world would be built on their terms alone. Later that evening, as their carriage carried them away from the reception toward the beginning of their wedding journey, a tour of Italy that Richard had insisted on arranging, knowing it had been Elara's lifelong dream, Elara found herself overwhelmed by the day's events. "Are you well?" Richard asked, noting her silence as they left London behind. "More than well," she assured him, reaching for his hand in the darkness of the carriage. "I was just thinking how extraordinary life can be. 6 months ago, I had resigned myself to a future of quiet spinsterhood, watching from the sidelines as others lived their lives. And now I find myself embarking on an entirely new chapter with a man I have come to love more deeply than I ever thought possible." The admission, the first time she had spoken the word love aloud to him, came naturally, without hesitation. Richard's breath caught audibly. Then, with a movement swift and decisive, he gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss far more passionate than the chaste one they had shared at the altar. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have loved you, Elara, since that first waltz," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion, "though I scarcely recognized the feeling at the time. It has been so long since I allowed myself to want anything beyond duty and responsibility, since Clarissa's betrayal left me cold and guarded. You, my dearest, have thawed a heart I thought frozen forever." Elara raised a hand to cup his cheek, marveling at the freedom to touch him, to express the tenderness that had grown between them. "And now," he said, drawing her closer still, "I find myself wanting everything with you. A life, a family, if fate permits it, a partnership in every sense of the word." Elara's heart swelled at the mention of a family, a hope she had long buried. "Even if society never quite accepts us?" she asked, giving voice to the one doubt that still lingered, a ghost of her former self. Richard's laugh was low and unconcerned, a rumble against her ear. "Society will adjust, as it always does. In time, our match will become merely another footnote in the annals of the Thorne's history. But what we build together, Elara, that will be our legacy, far more significant than any gossip or scandal." As the carriage rolled through the darkening countryside toward Dover, where a ship awaited to carry them to the continent, Elara rested her head against her husband's shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. His words were a balm, dismissing the world's noise and affirming their shared purpose. "I love you, Richard," Elara whispered into the comfortable silence that had fallen between them, his arm tightened around her shoulders, his lips brushing her temple in a gesture of tenderness that needed no words, yet he offered them anyway, his deep voice soft in the intimate darkness of the carriage. "And I love you, my Duchess, more than I ever thought possible." Their mutual declarations of love filled the carriage, a warm, private world of their own making. Their wedding journey through Italy was a dream come true for Elara. Together, they wandered through the ancient ruins of Rome, stood awestruck before the masterpieces of Florence, and glided through the canals of Venice, hand in hand. Richard, a knowledgeable and enthusiastic guide, reveled in her delight, watching her eyes light up as she saw the art and architecture she had only ever read about. They experienced different cultures, tasted new foods, and simply existed as a couple, free from the scrutinizing gaze of London society. It was a beautiful, fulfilling start to their marriage, a testament to shared joy and burgeoning love. Upon their return to London, and then to Blackwood Manor, Elara and Richard settled into a new life together, one shaped by mutual respect and a deep connection. They faced the lingering societal skepticism and the practical considerations of managing his vast estates as equals, their partnership strengthening with each shared decision. Elara, once the overlooked spinster, now moved with a quiet confidence that radiated through Blackwood's grand halls. Their home became a sanctuary of contentment, a place where their unique bond flourished, undisturbed by the world's judgment. Their love was a quiet, powerful force that bound them, making them resilient against any challenge. The grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor glittered with candlelight, the air fragrant with the scent of hothouse flowers, as the cream of society mingled and danced beneath the soaring ceilings. At the center of it all stood the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, their expressions serene as they greeted their guests with gracious warmth. "They make a striking couple, do they not?" murmured Lady Seraphina to Arthur, who had just claimed her hand for a dance. "One would hardly credit the scandal their match once caused." Arthur smiled, watching his sister as she stood beside her husband, her auburn hair, now liberally streaked with silver, elegantly arranged and adorned with the Blackwood emeralds. At 42, Elara radiated a confidence and contentment that made her more beautiful than she had ever been in her youth. "Society has a short memory when confronted with success," he observed, leading Seraphina into the pattern of the dance, "and by any measure, their marriage has been a remarkable success." The grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor glittered with candlelight, the air fragrant with the scent of hothouse flowers, as the cream of society mingled and danced beneath the soaring ceilings. At the center of it all stood the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, their expressions serene as they greeted their guests with gracious warmth. "They make a striking couple, do they not?" murmured Lady Seraphina Thorne to Arthur, who had just claimed her hand for a dance. "One would hardly credit the scandal their match once caused." Arthur smiled, watching his sister as she stood beside her husband, her auburn hair, now liberally streaked with silver, elegantly arranged and adorned with the Blackwood emeralds. At 42, Elara radiated a confidence and contentment that made her more beautiful than she had ever been in her youth. "Society has a short memory when confronted with success," he observed, leading Seraphina into the pattern of the dance. "And by any measure their marriage has been a remarkable success." Indeed, the tongue that had once whispered so cruelly about the Duke's inexplicable choice had gradually fallen silent as the months passed, and Richard's devotion to his older bride showed no signs of waning. If anything, his regard for Elara had only deepened with time, evident in the way his eyes sought her across crowded rooms, in the attentiveness with which he listened when she spoke, in the private smiles they shared that hinted at a connection far deeper than mere social convenience. Across the ballroom, a young footman approached the Duchess, bending to whisper something in her ear. Elara's face lit with a joy so profound it stole her breath. She turned immediately to touch her husband's arm, conveying news that caused his usually reserved expression to transform with delight. With brief apologies to their guests, the Duke and Duchess slipped from the ballroom, leaving their guests to speculate on their sudden departure. "The nursery, I imagine," Lady Seraphina explained to Arthur as they completed their dance. "My nephew has a remarkable talent for timing his demands to coincide with social obligations." Arthur chuckled. "A trait he seems to have inherited from his father, if Richard's strategic exits from tedious parliamentary debates are any indication." The miracle of Elara's pregnancy, coming just months after their wedding, had silenced the last of society's skeptics. The birth of James Edward Richard Valerius Thorne, Marquis of Stonehaven, and heir to the Dukedom of Blackwood, 10 months after their marriage, had transformed scandal into fairy tale in the eyes of the ton. Upstairs in the spacious nursery suite, overlooking the moonlit gardens, Elara and Richard stood side by side at the cradle of their 8-month-old son, watching as the nurse settled him back to sleep after his evening feeding. "He has your eyes," Richard observed softly, his arm around his wife's waist, pulling her gently against him. "And your stubbornness," Elara replied with a gentle laugh, her voice soft so as not to disturb the sleeping infant, "demanding attention in the middle of our spring ball." Richard pressed a kiss to her temple, inhaling the familiar lavender scent of her hair. "I can hardly blame him. I, too, prefer your company to that of our entire guest list combined." The nurse curtsied and withdrew, leaving them alone with their sleeping son, the child that society had deemed impossible, yet who had arrived nonetheless, healthy and strong, and adored beyond measure by both his parents. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life," Elara confessed, leaning into her husband's embrace, her gaze fixed on the tiny, perfect face in the cradle. "That all of this, you, James Blackwood, is real and not some dream from which I'll wake." "Very real," Richard assured her, turning her gently in his arms to face him, his expression serious and loving. "Though I confess to similar moments of disbelief. How did I exist for 38 years without you, Elara? It seems inconceivable now." His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his eyes drinking in her familiar features. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the beloved features that had become as familiar to her as her own. "We found each other when we were ready, I think," she suggested, her voice thoughtful, "when we had both lived enough to recognize true value when we saw it." Richard smiled, the warm, genuine smile that he reserved exclusively for her and their son. "The most valuable discovery of my life," he agreed, bending to capture her lips in a tender kiss. It was a kiss full of gratitude, of profound understanding, and of a love that had defied every expectation. Below, the music from the ballroom drifted up through the open windows, a reminder of the social obligations awaiting their return, yet for a moment longer they lingered, wrapped in each other's arms beside their sleeping child. "We should return to our guests," Elara murmured eventually, though she made no move to leave the circle of his arms. In a moment, Richard replied, his eyes still drinking in the sight of her, his wife, his Duchess, the woman who had transformed his life with her intelligence, her dignity, and her boundless capacity for love. Let them wait just a little longer. He cherished these stolen moments, these quiet acts of prioritizing their private happiness over the relentless demands of society. It was a quiet defiance, a testament to the new rules they had forged together. And so they remained, the Duke and his unexpected Duchess, their extraordinary love story having silenced the whispers and defied the conventions of their world. Together they had rewritten the rules of what was possible, proving that true connection could flourish at any age, that value lay not in youth or beauty, but in the depth and quality of one's character, and that love, when genuine, could overcome even the most entrenched societal expectations. Their journey had not been easy, marked by skepticism, gossip, and personal battles against ingrained insecurities, but it had forged a bond of unbreakable strength. In the cradle beside them, young James stirred briefly, his small hand reaching out in sleep. Elara gently tucked the blanket around him, her heart so full of love for her family that it seemed impossible to contain. "Happy?" Richard asked softly, watching her face in the gentle lamplight. "Beyond anything I ever imagined possible," she replied with simple truth. Hand in hand, they slipped from the nursery and made their way back toward the glittering ballroom below, where society awaited the return of the Duke and Duchess, whose unlikely love story had become the toast of London, no longer a scandal, but an inspiration. For in finding each other, Elara and Richard had discovered not just personal happiness, but a truth too powerful to be denied, that love, true and genuine, recognized no boundaries of age or convention, and that it was never, ever too late to begin again. Dear listener, life, like the story of Elara and Richard, rarely follows the path we expect. In a world that often celebrates youth above all else, it's easy to believe that our chances for love, for new beginnings, for joy, diminish with each passing year. But Elara's journey reminds us of a profound truth. It is never too late to find happiness. Her story is a testament that the most beautiful chapters can begin when we least expect them, transforming what we thought was a closed book into an epic adventure. At 40, society had written Elara's story for her, a tale of spinsterhood and quiet resignation. Yet her most beautiful chapter was just beginning. This wasn't despite her age, but because of it. The wisdom she had gathered, the self-knowledge she had cultivated, the dignity she had maintained through years of subtle dismissal. These were precisely the qualities that made her truly remarkable to someone who could see beyond society's narrow definitions of worth. Her journey teaches us that true value often ripens with time. Perhaps you too have felt invisible at times. Perhaps you've heard whispers that your moment is past, that opportunities for love, adventure, or fulfillment belong to the young. But remember this: the most authentic connections often come when we have lived enough to know ourselves truly, when we have weathered disappointments and emerged with our kindness intact. Your life experiences are not a burden, but a rich tapestry that makes you uniquely you. Your life experience isn't a liability. It's your greatest strength, the patience you've developed, the perspective you've gained, the resilience you've built. These are treasures beyond price. Like Richard, the right people will recognize and cherish these qualities in you. They will see the depth that youth often lacks, the quiet strength forged in countless small battles, and the profound beauty of a soul truly lived. Embrace every chapter of your journey. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, know that your story continues to unfold in beautiful and unexpected ways. Rest well, knowing that the most meaningful chapters of your story may still lie ahead. You are seen, you are valued, and you are worthy of every happiness at every age. Allow yourself the grace to hope, the courage to believe, and the openness to receive the joy that awaits you whenever it may arrive. With deepest appreciation for sharing this journey with us, the Legends of the Fall team thanks you. We hope Elara and Richard's story reminded you that love has no age, and that being seen for who you truly are is the most romantic thing of all. Their tale is a beacon of hope for all who have ever doubted their own worth. If this story touched your soul, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it with your loved ones. Your support motivates us to keep telling more stories full of love, redemption, and emotional twists. Every interaction helps us reach more listeners who need to hear these powerful messages of hope and resilience. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions. Dive into another world where love conquers all, and human spirit triumphs against the odds. With love, the Legends of the Fall team. A dusty attic in Vance House 25 years ago. Young Elara, perhaps 15, sat cross-legged amidst forgotten trunks. A weighty tome on ancient civilizations open in her lap. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight, piercing the gloom, illuminating crude sketches of Roman arches and Egyptian pyramids on a discarded scroll beside her. She imagined herself a daring explorer, unearthing secrets from forgotten lands, her mind alight with curiosity. The murmur of a ball downstairs was a distant hum, easily ignored. Her mother, Lady Vance, appeared at the attic door, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Elara, my dear, are you not yet dressed? The guests will be arriving. One must focus on proper accomplishments, not dusty old books." Young Elara would nod, a practiced smile on her face, but her heart remained stubbornly in the pages. A secluded garden path 20 years ago. A younger Elara, in her early 20s, walked beside Mr. Caldwell, a suitor her family had deemed suitable. His smile was polite, his eyes devoid of warmth. "Miss Vance," he began, clearing his throat, "I must confess, while I admire your intellect, I find you rather too bookish. A wife, you see, requires a certain vivacity, a simpler mind, perhaps, to manage a household and entertain guests. I believe our paths diverge." Elara's cheeks flushed, a deep, painful blush. She had spent hours preparing witty conversation, eager to share her thoughts, only to have her very essence dismissed as a flaw. The wilting rose in her hand felt like a symbol of her own fading hopes. She offered a stiff curtsy, her heart silently shattering. Too bookish, too quiet, not enough. The words echoed for years. A lavish drawing room 15 years ago. Lord Thorne, then 23, stood rigidly as Lady Clarissa Ashworth, his beautiful fiancée, idly fanned herself. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes held a chilling calculation. "Richard, my dear," she purred, "I find myself in a dreadful predicament. You are, quite frankly, too serious." I had imagined a life of dazzling balls and endless adoration, not intellectual discourse. She paused, her gaze flicking to his family crest above the mantel. And while your title and fortune are, naturally, beyond reproach, I fear I simply cannot endure you. Thorne felt a cold dread spread through him. He had seen the superficiality, but not the outright treachery. You only desired my title? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. Clarissa merely shrugged. Was that not obvious? I find you rather dull. Our engagement is at an end. The sound of a teacup shattering on the floor went unnoticed by Clarissa, but Thorne felt a piece of his heart splinter with it, solidifying his guarded nature. A society gathering 14 years ago. Lady Ashworth, Clarissa's mother, held court, her face a mask of furious indignation. The Duke of Blackwood, I tell you, such cruelty! He broke my poor Clarissa's heart, ruined her prospects, and for what? Some trivial, imagined slight. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, conveniently omitting Clarissa's true motives. I vow he will pay for this ignominy. No man treats my daughter so and expects to escape unscathed. Clarissa, pale and feigning distress, allowed herself to be comforted, playing the wronged victim to perfection. Society buzzed with condemnation for the aloof Duke, while Lady Ashworth's vow of vengeance simmered, fueling a lasting, bitter antagonism that would follow Thorne, and later Elara, for years to come. Arthur Vance's study, a few weeks after the first ball. Arthur paced before the fireplace, his brow furrowed in a deep frown as Lady Vance sat, wringing her hands. It's outrageous, Mother, he fumed. This Duke, playing games with Elara's reputation. After all she's endured, to be made a spectacle of by such a man, I won't allow it. He stopped, slamming his fist gently on the mantelpiece. He will not publicly humiliate my sister. I will confront him, demand to know his intentions. If he thinks he can toy with her affections, he has another thing coming. Lady Vance wrung her hands. But Arthur, he is a duke. And Elara, she is 40. Perhaps it is merely courtesy. Courtesy be damned, Arthur retorted, his protective fury overriding decorum. I will not stand by and watch her heart be broken again. Lord Thorne's study, before the Kew Gardens visit. The air crackled with tension as Arthur Vance, his posture rigid with protective fury, confronted Lord Thorne. Your Grace, Arthur began, his voice tight, I must demand an explanation for your attentions to my sister. Elara has endured enough. She is not some debutante to be toyed with, nor is she a wager for your amusement. Her heart is vulnerable, and your past reputation, particularly with Lady Clarissa Ashworth, gives me grave cause for concern. Thorne, seated behind his desk, remained composed, his gray eyes unwavering. Arthur, he replied, his voice calm, I understand your concern. Indeed, it is a testament to your character. My intentions towards Elara are entirely honorable. My past with Lady Clarissa taught me precisely what I do not seek in a wife, artifice and mercenary ambition. With Elara, I find only authenticity, intelligence, and a depth of character I have sought for years. I assure you, I have no intention of causing her pain. He leaned forward slightly. I respect your sister immensely, and it is that respect, coupled with a growing affection, that guides my actions. Arthur studied Thorne's face intently, searching for any hint of insincerity. The Duke's gaze was steady, his words direct, and without prevarication. Slowly, Arthur's rigid posture relaxed. I admit, Your Grace, I see a sincerity in you now that I had not anticipated. He took a deep breath. My sister's happiness is paramount. If you are truly honorable in your intentions, then I give you my reluctant approval to continue courting her. But be warned, Lord Thorne, if you ever cause Elara pain, you will answer to me. Thorne rose, his expression grave. My intentions are entirely honorable, Arthur. I would never cause Elara pain. Her happiness, I assure you, has become of utmost importance to me. Arthur gave a hesitant nod, a silent truce between them. A society dinner, a few months after the wedding. Lady Ashworth and Lady Winfield huddled in a corner, their voices low but sharp. "Unprecedented luck, I call it," Lady Ashworth hissed. Her eyes narrowed. "And this sudden pregnancy? Highly suspicious, I say. They say my mother's family had connections to Romany travelers, you know. Perhaps she bewitched him." Lady Winfield nodded vigorously. "Indeed. The child, I dare say, might not even be his, a desperate attempt to secure her position." But their venomous whispers were met with general dismissal. Elara's radiant happiness, Richard's unwavering devotion, and the undeniable fact of a healthy, perfect heir had rendered their malice impotent. Society, ever fickle, had found a new, more compelling narrative, the fairy tale, not the scandal. Lady Ashworth's pinched, bitter face was a stark contrast to the joyous atmosphere, a final, defeated echo of a world that had tried and failed to break them. Years later, the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor glittered once more with candlelight, the air vibrant with laughter and music. Elara, her auburn hair now beautifully threaded with silver, stood beside Richard, greeting their guests with a serene confidence. Their son, James, now a spirited boy of 5, darted through the legs of the adults, a whirlwind of energy and youthful curiosity, before being gently redirected by his governess. Arthur and Lady Seraphina, now firm friends, watched them from across the room. "They are quite magnificent, aren't they?" Seraphina observed, her blue eyes soft with affection. "To think of the fuss society made." Arthur smiled, a deep, contented warmth filling him as he watched his sister. Elara radiated a profound happiness, her eyes sparkling with intelligence and a quiet joy. "Indeed," he agreed. "But their legacy is not the gossip, Seraphina. It is the strength of their love, the family they built, and the truth they revealed, that a true connection can redefine everything." Elara met Richard's gaze across the room, a private glance passing between them, full of shared history, quiet understanding, and boundless love. His hand found hers, intertwining their fingers, a silent testament to the powerful force that had redefined their world. Their love story continued, a quiet, powerful force that had become the enduring legacy of Blackwood Manor, a living testament that true happiness, truly seen, was the most powerful triumph of all.